Good morning and welcome to Raise the Bar, the Sky High and Fly Jump Camps podcast. I'm your host, Troy Haynes, former UCLA high jumper and longtime coach, and now seeker of truth. I am on a lifelong quest to perfect, if possible, to enhance my coaching, to be able to better understand what is required to train my athletes to the utmost so that they are the best that they can be, and hopefully to get them to high levels in competition. And in that quest today, I have coming in as my guest a young man that I again saw on Instagram. Those of you that have been listening to the podcast for a while know that I do some of my best work on Instagram. So as far as me learning, that's kind of the place, my go-to. And I'm looking at Kyle Knapp. He is I believe he's a PT guy. We're going to find out here. It says fitness trainer. And he is in the middle of rehabbing his own Achilles rupture. So we're going to find out, what that's all about. And Kyle has 196,000 followers on Instagram. His posts, you can see that he's in good shape. He does a lot of really difficult stuff. And some of that, again, could go in the category of rehab, and then some, also goes in the category of just training, for whatever level. And we're going to find out about that as well. From my point of view as a coach, I'm looking at what I see from Kyle, and I just recently have had a bunch of athletes that need what I would call pre-training. So I'm going to find out about that. Getting ready. I see Kyle. He's getting in.
What's up, Troy?
Hey, how you doing, Kyle?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Good. I appreciate you taking your time out to be with us so early in the day.
Well, trainers are used to starting their day at 5 or 6. 7 a.m. is like nothing.
Right. Yeah. I'm finding the only time I get to work out is that early in the day. I can't make any time later. By the time teaching's done and training other athletes is done and all that, I'm ready to go home. So it's hard to get anything at that point,
I know, right?
So I was just giving my listeners here, again, we're here on Raise the Bar, the Jump Camps podcast, and we have with us Kyle Knapp. And Kyle, could you give us a little background about how you got going in your business, exactly what your business is? I see just 2-word description of fitness trainer, but I'm willing to bet you wear a few more hats than that. So why don't you give us a little background how you got started and what it is that you do?
Well, I've been in the business since 2001, so about 22 years as a personal trainer. I started as just a regular trainer. I was going to school. I mean, I'm a lifelong athlete and lover of all different kinds of things, movement and sport and whatnot. And kind of as I was finishing being done with relatively the college age kind of thing, I played baseball and football through junior college. And then as I kind of got into figuring out what to do with the rest of the life and all of that good stuff, when I entered graduate school, I needed something. My degree is actually in psychology from a younger, and then from one undergrad, and then I got into graduate school in sports psychology. So that was actually how I got into sort of the realm of kinesiology, was sports psychology, as it was housed at Cal State Fullerton, is in the kinesiology program. So because of that, I was doing some things and just got a little bit more into the physical side as I was taking some classes that sort of I had to prereq because I was coming from a psych major. Started taking a few more classes actually in kinesiology, physiology, all those different things that sort of supported their program. So as I was learning about the sports psych and diving deeper into that, I was kind of getting more interested in the physical nature. And I was always kind of an athletic person, but never really did any weight training or strength training when I was young. So I started to do that, and I found out, hey, you can really change your body, and you can elevate and you can make this better and you can do this just by doing some strength training and some resistance stuff. So I got into like, hey, maybe I'll just pay the bills, learn how to be a personal trainer, go to school at night, do some different things in the, during the day and all that. And so after a while, I started to realize that the sports psych, in order to sort of elevate that at the time, I was going to have to do a doctorate. The job market wasn't great.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll just stay in this, kind of physical space. And then I've been in there ever since.
Wow. Yeah.
So I've been doing that. I worked at a big gym at a Bally Total Fitness. For anyone who's been around long enough, they might remember those before they got bought out by Crunch and
Right.
LA Fitness and whatnot. And then did that, ran a personal training program, kind of went up the ladder in the corporate side, found out that I can't train anybody then. And so that was where the real love was, in the business, was just helping people. And about 17, 18 years ago, came over to this little training studio, and I've been here ever since, working one-on-one with people in kind of a small setting. So in a nutshell, that's been the last 20 years. And
Wow.
it's been
That's quite a
just
journey,
doing that.
man.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you mentioned the sports psychology, because here on Raise the Bar, we're interested in how to get better as jumpers, and the jumper types that I train, high jump, long jump, triple jump, pole vaulters, an explosive power sport. We're looking at anything and everything from weight training, plyometrics, speed, agility, and all that stuff, and but we have kind of nudged our way into a little bit of nutrition, and then also the sports psychology is seeing that become more and more prevalent, through some athletes having very visual meltdowns, right in the middle of their competitive careers, where, we had a tennis player who, is almost basically retired at the age of 25. We had, Simone Biles, very publicly, right as the Olympics were hitting, we just complete, and due to whatever, right? I mean, it's just one of those things.
Yeah.
Wow, it's so much pressure, and you finally see it. People are becoming less afraid of talking about it. So, and then you were getting ready to do that, and you said at the time there was no job market. I see that.
No.
I remember that, and now it just seems like, I mean, I'm a golfer. I love playing golf on the side, and I love watching the guys talk with their caddies. Right there on TV, like, "Hey, what are we gonna do here?" And some of these caddies have gone from, give me the yardage and give me a 6-iron, to these little motivational gurus, and they're little swing keys, and little motivational thoughts. Be positive here. You can hit this shot. Like, so you see a lot of that. Too. So. What the thing that I brought up also, Kyle, that struck my fancy was that you mentioned on your feed that you had just suffered through a ruptured Achilles. So how bad was that? And now share with us a little bit about what you're doing on your rehab.
Well, that was, I mean, not surprisingly for most people, that was a life-altering event. It was one of those things where you never see it coming. You think you're relatively prepared for anything. And someone as like myself, who for the most part has been a pretty unaffected, at least from an injury perspective, had a pretty blessed life. It was the first time where I really had that kind of moment where you're like, wow, you're not invincible. And, you kind of go back and forth as far as, maybe I wasn't quite preparing myself for some of the activities. It was a relatively uneventful little agility training drill that I was doing. And just out of nowhere, seemingly, I mean, obviously the body wasn't out of nowhere for the body, because the body wasn't prepared for whatever happened in that moment. But yeah, full rupture. Ended up, just as soon as it happened, I just kind of planted my foot to cut and go chase a little reaction ball. I felt it right away.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where you almost can't believe it happened. And then you realize it happened. And then now you're like, all right, what do I do?
Yeah.
And it was like, you go through all the process mentally. And even to this day, it's been about 3 months since my surgery, almost exactly 3 months since my surgery. Almost any given day, you're like, I can't believe that happened. And then you have those moments where it's still shocking that something that severe, and and in the grand scheme of things, if that's the worst thing that's happened to me, I said once again, pretty blessed. But at the same time, like when you're used to being very physically mobile and capable and almost being able to do anything you want, to kind of have that taken from you, even if it's temporarily for a few months or a year, is it mentally was an incredible hurdle. And so one of the things I tried to do was think, you can't take back anything. It's like I tell my kids, you can't take back anything that has happened. You can just kind of move forward and do your best to, make each day as good as you can and do your best from here on out. So the last 3 months has sort of been a slow but steady journey in that realm, where I've kind of tried on each given day, although not every day is perfect. Not every day it's not a linear. Some days are up, some days are down. You're still slowly tracking. Like I tell people, it's sort of like the tortoise. Like, I'm not trying to win a race in 2 months. I'm not trying to win a race even in a year. I'm trying to win the race of life. And so for me, thinking about kind of performance, not only in a micro, but also a macro approach,
Right.
has really made it a little bit easier, because I just tackle every day just a little bit. And whether it's an up or a down, I'm still looking, am I progressing? And I am. So I'm just that little tortoise that's chugging along, and eventually I'll get there. So, but it's been a tremendously eye-opening experience for me, not only physically, but then also just mentally as well, to kind of grasp all of that happening.
Yeah.
So
The thing that comes to my mind is one of my favorite classes in the undergrad, kines department, which I don't believe they have anymore. Because when I went to do graduate work, it had already disbanded. But one of my favorite classes was a biomechanics of musculoskeletal injury class, and we learned classic injuries and their scenarios, how they happen, what actually happens when it does happen. Things like boot top fractures, in skiing, when you stop and your skis stop forward and you shatter both, tibias and fibulas and all that, or the complete ACL, the complete, like you said, the Achilles rupture. And my first thought was, when you said was it a complete rupture, my thought was, okay, did it roll up the back of your calf, like a window shade? Because I've heard, the tension on your Achilles is pretty, large. And so I've heard that it, balls up right behind your knee, and then you go from there. The other thing that occurred to me was, I'm talked with Doug Nordquist, who's a great American high jumper, and he blew out his ACL, and then on a cadaver reconstructed knee jumped 2 meters 36, which is like 7, 8 quarters. Well, now he's limping around on a brace all the time, because that knee has not gotten any better over time.
Yeah.
He keeps saying that the brace is holding up pretty well, and he's going to hold off on the surgery, because everybody's like, when are you getting that knee replaced? And he's like, well, it's still pretty good, and he's waiting for the techniques to get so good, I guess, that it's going to be like a brand new knee. But that was the second thought that came to me was, how has that, changed? Like what exactly did they do? So kind of walk us through that a little bit, the injury itself and what they did to fix you up.
Okay. Well, in the moment, it just feels like it felt like I got hit with a baseball. Like as I went to push off, like it just had that like almost reverberating kind of like, and some people call it like if you were to dry fire a bow and arrow and you just, boom, you just let that go. It feels like a reverberation. It didn't ball up for me, but it was one of those things where I went to the ground, put my finger on my Achilles, and there was no tension there. It was just soft. So that's when I kind of knew. I'm like, and I couldn't move my foot, so I kind of knew what had happened. But once again, they went and they did what's called a Thompson test, and they look at your foot, and they put you on your back and your legs up, and if your Achilles is intact, there's some tension there, and you have a little plantar flexion. If not, it just droops. And so that was mine. And they did a few other tests, but it was pretty easy to tell that there was a full rupture, because a lot of times you'll have tears, but not a full rupture. So mine had completely separated. It didn't retract too high up in the calf. And one of the things that happens is as you have that, if you don't get surgery right away, it will start going more and more. If it doesn't already retract, it can possibly go more and more. The more you use it, the more your calf tries to flex, it'll slowly kind of pull that up. So I stayed off it. It was only 6 days between injury and my surgery, so I was able to really minimize how much of that retraction I had. Then they went in there. There's a sheath that covers the Achilles. They have to open up that sheath. They sew the Achilles back together. They sew the sheath. They sew the skin. Put you in a cast. Put you in a boot for a week or a couple of weeks, just as the swelling goes. As soon as the swelling kind of comes down, they cast you up for a couple of weeks. Once that happens, take you out of the cast, put you in a boot, typically on a little bit of a slant, and then over time start bringing you back to kind of 90 degrees. After a couple months of that, get you out. They'll start rehab usually about 6 weeks. I was on vacation, so I didn't actually start. I took my vacation right before rehab was going to start, and didn't actually start my rehab till about 8.5 weeks. I was doing some stuff on my own, but didn't start traditional rehab. And then just kind of been working through small little steps from there. And now I'm actually in a regular shoe walking around, still a touch of a limp because the range of motion and the strength, the calf strength to kind of push off isn't quite fully back and won't be for a while, but that's where we're at now. So we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, that's, man, I the thing that I was impressed with, and when I went through this program, it was 40 years ago when I was just a kid in college, and we learned a little bit about where things were then. I'm wondering, comparing to now, and like one of the first things that they taught us was you want to try to get, obviously you're talking about the reduction of the swelling and all that, and that's pretty obvious, but the old paradigms, like back in the 60s and 70s, let's say, was say an NFL running back tore stuff in their knee, they would go in basically and just cut everything out, and then they would cast them up and immobilize. So that traditional way was, we're letting everything heal, but at the same time, without any support, body weight support or putting any tension on it in any way, you would get a lot of what do you call it? You get your adhesions, you get your, lack of flexibility, mobility, lack of loading causes, the tissues themselves, if they're not stressed at all, they don't really line up. Like they were telling us, you were talking about the fibers, right? And I know they've gotten better at these microsurgeries because they can go in and almost, reunite all the fibers together, like in a really tiny way, right? So, and that the better that is, the better. Like I heard it, if it's super wavy, you don't put a lot of tension on it, all those collagen fibers just look like two mops. They said it's just like fluids and fibers are everywhere. But if they can line them up and then you can start putting tension on them, they will line up even better. And then, right. So now the paradigm that I was taught, just again, mid to late 80s was we need to start getting movement going through there, as quickly as possible within reason, right? Without re-injuring anything. And then also, like you said, you got to get your range of motion back. You got to get those fibers lined up, you got to, and then, they kind of go through there. So I'm just wondering, if that has changed even more in the last, because I know science just seems to be exploding in all directions. So, I know they're learning more. So is there anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I think in general, what they are finding and what they believe now is that movement and a graduated, very appropriate kind of circulatory and kind of a neuromuscular stimulatory type of movement as benefiting almost everything. Now with Achilles, they still, I should say, as an average Joe, and going through that, I'm part of the Kaiser network. So we, their sports medicine, they don't necessarily have a sports, in my area, they don't have a sports medicine department. So when you go through this, like my experience was very average Joe, because that's the only really option they have. Now, if you're in a different situation, if you're an athlete, you have access to sports medicine, different surgeries and therapies, there might be a different approach as far as some of the surgical stuff and some of the rehab. That was not my experience since I didn't have access to that. So that being said, to answer your question, I only kind of know my average Joe experience with it. As far as like what I was able to research on my own to kind of add to it was that I tried to, now they had me from a medical standpoint be very minimal with what I did. I tried to add a little bit of stimulatory stuff. I was trying to, from the very beginning, I was moving my feet and creating some micro movements from the very beginning. Even if like I was casted, I was still getting slight pressure one way. Even if I'm moving an eighth of an inch, I'm trying to create that little bit of tension, that movement, that blood flow, just to keep that stimulation, that connection. Because one of the things I did not want to lose was sort of the connection to all of the muscles. There's atrophy, there's all of the different loss in strength and ability and pressure sensation, all of that all happened. But my idea was to kind of take that concept of creating some movement, some stimulation, some little tiny stuff, and just try to incorporate that the whole time. And so from a personal standpoint, that was what I added because I thought that was necessary. And for me, in dealing with people with all sorts of injuries over the last 20 years, it's something that I've found is really important, not only just for them to heal kind of from a physiological standpoint, but mentally. Because if you feel like you can do little things, even if it's like all I'm going to do is some toe splays and some toe waves and tiny little pressure, like from a mental, psychological perspective, it really helps you kind of stay on that journey and know that you're in control of more than what you think, as opposed to being this passive observer who just sees what happens. And hopefully when your leg comes out of the cast,
Yeah.
it's okay. You feel, at least feel like you have a little bit of control. And I do think it actually has some benefit and helps too.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting too. I think, I'm sure everybody's heard, different stories, but there have been particular times, maybe an athlete who was just tremendously talented, but maybe never trained that hard, or didn't train as hard as they could. And then they get an injury, say it's not a catastrophic, complete rupture, but maybe it's just, enough to sideline them for a couple months. Right. And they go in and they start rehabbing. And if you get a really good someone in that field, all of a sudden they're strengthening all the muscles and they're getting flexibility and this, that, and the other thing. And they come back better, than they were when they went in because they've never really, been forced to do anything in that area. And then all of a sudden, like, man, I got another, 5 miles an hour on my fastball, or I got, I can throw the out better than I used to, or, I've got more power when I do this, so that, the thought in my mind was is a couple fold, but as you're going through the rehab process and you're being a fitness trainer and doing that, can you see a way that this rehab process, I'm having trouble articulating my thought, but I've had different folders on my Instagram for months. I see something that you do that I really like, a particular body part or particular type of training, and I just go, oh, I'll hit save and I'll stick it in a file right somewhere on my. And I broke it down the other day. I have like 200 folders, and I'm like, okay, but I'm like,
that's a lot of folders.
Some of them are repeats because I forget that I've already done that. So I'm going through and organizing, but it's like, okay, can I break these into bigger, folders or whatever? But I call it prehab and then / rehab and stuff like that. So, the knees over toes guy, I follow him, for instance, and he was a complete ACL rupture, right? And now he's doing all these things that everybody's like, oh my gosh, you can rehab, you can bend your knee through these full ranges of motion, and it's not bad for you if you do it this way, and on and on and on. And so from what you're doing now, how does that line up with, say, I'm sure you've had athletes, you're talking about your average Joe and fitness trainer, but you've had some high level athletes, and as you're preparing them, what I say is I talk about prehab, and obviously we would like to train athletes so that they don't have this happen to them, right? So you go, how do you, in knees over toes guy terms, how do you bulletproof your Achilles and your ankle and all that so that kind of thing doesn't happen?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very big question what you just asked, and there's a probably a couple hours worth of good talk about all of that stuff. But in general, I think one of the things that I believe is important for almost everyone is sort of body connection and control, and this idea that you're working on coordinating your entire body together as often as you can, whether you're a high level athlete or whether you're the 92-year-old guy that I worked with the other day. I think almost everyone can benefit from working on controlling and coordinating your body in as many different ways as you can. I think for the most part, people don't do enough of the small stuff. And I think that's when I look back at the precipitating events, to my injury, is that I was really good for a long, long time about doing a lot of the little stuff, a lot of good variety and movement. I was doing unpredictable stuff and playground workouts and ninja training and sports stuff. And for the last couple of years, I had not done as much. Life got a little busier. I used to take something that I called fitness field trips. And that was once a week. I would go out either to a new place I had never been or with just a piece of equipment out to a field and just create and do different things. And what it always got me doing was moving in unpredictable ways and doing things not only from a creative standpoint, but from a physically reactive standpoint where I was capable and ready for anything. Probably since COVID, and I hate to use COVID as an excuse to that, but that was sort of the mark where I found myself like reflecting upon this injury. I'm looking back and I'm like, you know what? I really stopped doing as many of those over the last couple of years, and particularly the last year with life and being busy, being more busy at work as work kind of got back to normal. I have 4 kids, so I'm coaching, I'm running here, running there. I just got to the point where I stopped doing as many of those kind of small things. And it doesn't seem like a lot for some people, but when you're used to having that stimulation all the time and you don't get it for a while, I think it puts your body in a position where if you do re-enter that arena, you may or may not be ready for it. And I think that's what happened to me, is that I was a proponent of small things, unpredictable things, and lots of stimulation, unique ways, all different kinds, all different situations, under fatigue, fresh, without warming up, all that. I was challenging everything. And then I got to a point where I stopped challenging everything. And I think I was at a point where I just maybe wasn't ready for that because I hadn't done the pre-work and I hadn't I hadn't prepared myself to be able to take on anything. So that being said, I think when you look at athletes, the more consistently you can keep that stimulation of all different kinds of exposures from a light perspective, I think it really prepares your body to be able to handle just about anything. Keeping yourself hydrated is one of those things. Like as I look at, what helps muscles and what helps athletes, doing all of these things under good levels of nutrition and hydration and preparation and warm-ups, all of those things really, I think, contribute to it. So the hydration thing was just something I thought about, but I didn't really necessarily connect to that, but it was one of the things that I wanted to throw out there. But from a warm-up perspective, getting back to the little things, I think that we can all benefit from, getting every body part to move at some point in some form of coordination before you do a physically kind of active thing, particularly of a high intensity, whether it's jumping or whether it's a team sport, is really something I think that is a must if you want to try to. I don't think you can bulletproof anything, but you can put yourself in a position where you're going to give yourself the greatest chance for success. You can minimize or at least reduce the risk of injury, and then you can put yourself in a position where if you do get hurt, you can bounce back a little bit better and a little faster. And then hopefully, like in my case, maybe learn a few things, get a few other strengths along the way, and quote unquote, be a little better on the back end overall. Like I said, the Achilles will never be the same. It actually might be a little bit tighter, might be a little bit more robust because of some of the scar tissue that's in there. I mean, who knows? But hopefully overall, I'll be a better athlete, smarter athlete, and a little bit more evolved kind of physical mover as a result of it. So I just talked a lot. I don't know if I actually answered your question or not, but
no, there's a wealth of information there, and the experience is valuable. I'm working with some high caliber athletes, both high school and elite, trying to get people to go to Olympic trials and things like that. And there's wisdom. You got to learn from people that have gone through stuff. And then if you say to a young kid, you need to avoid these mistakes, or also prepare to minimize these things when they happen by doing this. What do they say? Experience is wasted on the young, or I forget that one saying, but like, they don't understand, because it's just, they've never been through it. And when you're like you're saying, you feel invincible. You said one of the first things that hit you was, hey, I'm supposed to be invincible. Like I work out all the time. I train. How could this happen to me? And I'm sure every athlete that's had that happen to them has the same thing. I watched Kevin Durant do that, 5 years ago with the Golden State Warriors. Had a tight calf, and they were kind of trying to hold him back, and then they fell behind against Toronto, and he goes, I'm playing, and he lights it up for about 2 quarters, and then boom, you see him make a move, and he just goes right down and just sits there, and you can see the realization. He's just like, that's it, it's done. You could tell by the way he was sitting there. And so the idea of how to avoid is one, how to minimize is another, how to prepare ahead of time, just in case. The hydration is huge. And the thing that you mentioned that I want to bring up with everybody listening, who's, from any angle you're coming to, is the idea of active warm up that you hit, the full, complete warm up. All the new research that I keep, I hear about, and I don't read it, but I watch it all the time on everybody's feed, is, I teach running drills, the A drill, the B drill, the C drill. You go through that, and you have all these quote unquote active mobilities, hurdle stuff. I've seen guys doing this stuff on the ground, that you might have them do, where they squat down on one leg and then doing that kind of hip, side to side, and moving their legs up and around. And I'm watching all that stuff. I'm going, God, we're just learning so much. And I'm looking at these things. There's so many things that I look and I'm like, I don't think I could do that at all. Like I don't in that position. I don't know if I could do, I don't have that kind of flexibility anymore, blah, blah, blah. So I see huge applications and value in all these things. And, the idea of the complete, whatever that is, active warm-up sequence, like you said, before we jump into the stuff that I'm trying to get them to do, which, the high jump's a 5-second event, 5 or 6 seconds. You run full speed, jump straight up in the air, land on your back, and in the midst of all that, you're trying to get the body to perform at an incredible level. And then let's try not to kill ourselves as we're doing it, as we land. I messed up my neck in college, landing in the pit weird, it's just like, there's all kinds of things that can happen. So, that I see as a huge thing. And, the other angle that you were talking about, I see it now as a, what do I want to call it? A spectrum, or, I was noticing the whole thing that I do with my guys when we warm up. I say, I like you guys to be able to skip rope. I like you guys, the hand-eye coordination, the hand and feet fast. The speed agility that I see the soccer guys doing with the ladders, and there's speed agility, just fast feet, and it's going laterally instead of forward. Most of the track and field events, you don't need any agility. You're either running in a straight line or maybe on a curve, so I don't really need that. But at the same time, I need the explosive quickness and change of direction. So I'm like, I want to harness that. I want to get some central nervous system stuff in there. So I see people jump onto treadmills that are going faster than they can actually move. Like, oh, that's great stuff. I need that reaction time and that pop, as they come off the ground. So there's so many different things that when I'm looking at it, I'm always looking for these little pieces. And I know there's nothing that's magic, but I'm also like, I want to take that and incorporate it, to the best of my ability. So how do you go about doing that if you have an athlete that approaches you? Because you've got I'm assuming from a fitness standpoint, you can have people come up and say, hey, I just want to lose 20 pounds and be in better shape. And you've got somebody that comes up and say, hey, I want to perform at a high level doing this. How do you figure out what it is you're going to do with them, and, how you attack?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, every person is pretty unique, particularly if you're in a situation like yourself where you're dealing mostly with jumpers or jumping type of athletes or track athletes. You can have a little bit of a more narrow focus as far as some of your approach. If you're dealing with a tennis player, which a football player, or like I said, I had an NFL guy we worked with a little bit for a while. that's a much different thing
Right.
than a track athlete. Although there's some carryover, a tennis player is a little bit different. If you have someone who is a baseball player, like in the baseball world, and so I deal with a lot of that kind of stuff. If you have a youth athlete, they're all going to be slightly or moderately different. What I kind of think about in general is like you're trying to develop athleticism
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the sport. One of the things that I think in general is that when we look at the development of an athlete, the skills of being athletic, being coordinated, being strong, being explosive, that's something that almost every athlete can benefit from. So
Right.
my base is almost always addressing kind of coordination, body control, and the ability to do different things and control your body. So it's almost like the connection standpoint. So everything I do with an athlete starts from that point. Particularly the younger they are, the more I'm dealing with just learning how to move and control your body. And then as you get older, I always try to keep that as part of a thing that is the foundation of an athlete is number one is you learn how to control your body before you do anything else. You learn how to control your body. Now, in general, I'm thinking about like our space here is maybe 1,500 square feet. So a lot of times, what we have to do in a small little space is we have to learn how to control your body in a very controlled manner. So whether we're using 20 or 30 feet, or whether we're using a couple square feet, in general, what I like for people to do is to learn how to manipulate and control the finer things first, the small things, learn how to crawl, learn how to single leg balance, toe touch, do the things in which are very almost like primal. So there was a period of time when I was very much into the primal nature of movements and getting back to very core, almost biomechanical things. Like as you learn the foundation of growing from infant to toddler to to kid to adult, you kind of work through a lot of progressions of how the body learns how to move and coordinate. I would start people from the very beginning, have them on their back, rolling over, and kind of work almost through the infant
Mm-hmm.
nature of fitness to make sure that they could control all different parts of that before we
Right.
even get them into it. People don't quite always have the patience for that. So what I've sort of done over the years is graduated that to a very just a sample of each one. But I still love for every one of the people I work with, I love to see them crawl. I love to see them, walk. I love to see them jog. I love to see them kind of do different things, do somersaults, rolling over to see where their coordination, their body control is. So once again, after kind of talking around it a lot, to get back to the basics, like any particular athlete, I start them with basic body control and coordination. And then before we get into any higher level things, they have to demonstrate to me that they can control their body in a small space and then probably in a space of about 20 to 30 feet, kind of moving around before we kind of get to any of the higher level,
Right.
strength and plyometrics and that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah. And you threw out a term that I found fascinating, and this may or may not go along with what we're talking about, but you said the word ninja training. And I
Yes.
was like, okay, wait a minute. What's ninja training? Because I have one of my things with jumping is I tell the kids, and the elites both, I say, if you're making a lot of noise and you're grunting, I'm like, I'm not crazy about that for some reason. Like I've always liked, for some reason, the athlete that's incredibly smooth, the Roger Federers in tennis that just look beautiful while they're doing things and they don't ever look like they're lunging or off balance or, whatever. And the smooth effortlessness of Joe Montana, throwing a pass or whatever is like, I like the guys that look great at what they're doing. And then in the high jump, I'm teaching them heel toe at takeoff and control that roll. Like don't stomp. If you come up and you hear someone just slam their foot against the ground, I tell them now, I go, it's like a video game. I go, if you're leaving a heat signature and shock waves, you're not doing it right. I'm like,
Yeah.
I want that, off the ground where somebody goes, they were running. I didn't even hear that. Did they take off? Oh, look, they're in the air. Like I'm like, you should be like a Shaolin priest, look for, you can't be listen for, you can't be heard, So how does that how does that go? I'm curious. You brought it up. So when you're ninja
Yeah.
training somebody, what are you doing?
All right. Well, so ninja training sort of started. I mean, I was fascinated with ninjas when I was young. I don't know, for whatever reasons, I just thought they were, probably a lot of people. I'm 45. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s. And so for a lot of people, there was, movies and different things, and Bruce Lee and Jean-Claude Van Damme and Chuck Norris, and there was ninja.
Yep.
It was something that was part of the culture growing up. So I was always sort of fascinated with the physicality. I mean, there's the stealth and the kind of interesting behaviors and, different, missions and all of the things that they might do from a kind of a movie standpoint. But the physicality was something that always really interested me. So after having kids, you sort of learn, when you look at it from a fitness trainer, you're used to dealing with, adults and getting stronger and changing your bodies and doing different things, losing weight and whatnot. And then after having kids, I started to look at people moving. And that was one of the things that kind of changed a lot of my perspective on how I deal with people, because you start to see just movement and play and almost like freedom of expression from a physical nature. So when I looked at kind of how ninjas moved and I looked at how kids sort of develop, it was really interesting to kind of go through and apply that to myself. At the same time, you had the American Ninja Warrior franchise that was
Right.
going. And so all of the confluence of those different things, there was a little bit of like that primal kind of ancestral movement and basics about climbing trees. So I got into all of that. And the idea was that, once again, you want to get back to this idea that you can control your body. And what I found is that ninjas are what I thought was kind of a cool example of it, because you never really hear them doing things. They just sort of do stuff gracefully and almost without effort. And so one of my thoughts was that if I can kind of get myself or my kids or people that I deal with to lessen the effort they move with, it makes them more economical, makes them a little safer, makes them more explosive, more controlled, better body awareness, all of those things. So I started to do things like, step down from a step. Let's say you're doing a step up, step down from a step like you're a ninja. You don't want to be hurt.
Right.
So that was kind of where it started. And then we start to say, okay, well, I want you to try to move and walk from here to there, making the least amount of noise possible, just to see how soft they can do it. Doing a crossover step, a karaoke step, try to do that across this 30 feet of the gym. I'm going to close my eyes, see if I can not hear you, that kind of thing, to get them just to learn about how do I control, soften. But the big thing is I just wanted them to connect with their movement and pay more attention to what they were doing.
Mhm.
And all of the physical benefits, I think, of getting stronger, more coordinated, and more light on your feet is one of those things that I think just kind of helps people in general. But it was also kind of a fun thing to bring in. Most people are familiar with ninjas and kind of have a concept of it. So it was a neat little thing, particularly with younger people or people of my generation. Like if I talked about ninja training to an 85-year-old, maybe doesn't quite connect.
Yeah.
But a lot of other generations, they're like, oh, okay, yeah, and so it became a kind of a fun thing to do. At the same time, I thought, from a beneficial standpoint, brought in a lot of unique, kind of things to actual training styles and things from that nature. And then I got into American Ninja Warrior, trained for that. Actually, ended up on the show, didn't do that great, crashed out on an obstacle, trained, then started training for it big time. And then for a couple of years, trained a lot for it, never ended up getting back on the show. But that was a 5, 6, 7 year part of my life, from kind of mid 30s to 40, where I was big into all of the, I mean, American Ninja training, but just kind of that concept of general ninja-ness and and whatnot for my own like physical, and then I brought
Right.
into the kind of the clients a little bit too. So
I keep
yeah.
thinking about that, back in my quote unquote glory days when I was in my 20s, at school jumping. And then I keep thinking, that would have been so cool back in the 80s, early 80s, when I was really in shape, trying to get to the Olympic trials and the high jump and whatnot, to go, could I have done anything on those courses? I think every athlete probably looks at that and goes, oh, man, I could do that. And then there's certain things I'm like, God, I'm pretty weak there. I don't know. That would be tough. It's like the ones where they're holding on to the bars with both hands and like climbing up. that jump
Mhm.
up and do that. I'm like, I don't know about that, man. I don't know if the grip strength, they show those little things where they're holding on to pegs with their fingers. And like, I'm like,
Yeah.
you can't open bottle caps now. I'm like, I don't know that, that's not going to last very long. So,
Yeah, it's so much harder. It's so much harder than people realize. Um, it used to be like if the people now went on the courses that they did 10 years ago, it would be a piece of cake for anyone who trained.
Mhm.
Now, the preparation and the strength and the ability and the skill you have to compete on those things it's when we look at the difference between a recreational or a high school baseball player and a professional athlete, a professional baseball player, the difference between those two is the same as what you would expect from like these ninja courses. You think like your general athlete can go in and do a few things, but what it actually requires to compete at the level that they put these people through is so far higher
Yeah.
than most people realize. I said, even the couple years that when I was on, and then I went and did some like obstacle testing and did a few things for the couple years after that, it got harder almost exponentially every year because people started training for it and they found it was going to be too easy. So then
Yeah.
they had to basically make it so far, they had to elevate it by so much that people really, any normal Joe or Jane, it's extremely rare for just a good athlete to be able to handle those things
Right.
unless you just happen to be good at a lot of the grip and a lot of the body control. You'll see actually one of the most successful groups of people, aside from like gymnasts and rock climbers, are pole vaulters.
Yes.
So pole vaulters, because of the body awareness, the strength, the explosiveness, the grip, like all the upper, they
Yeah.
actually, there's a couple of them, including one of the top women who's ever done it, was a pole vaulter in college.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
interesting. You mentioned that because that skill set, the body awareness for sure. In pole vault now, a lot of the coaches, it used to be you're thinking, okay, I need someone who's really tall and really fast, but those are advantages for sure, but they might not have the body control. And then it was like, okay, well, gymnasts are fast and they're strong upper body, and then they're also fearless and they're not afraid to run and lean back and invert and swing up and do a backflip basically up at the top of the bar and everything else that they got to do. So it's like that has become not a requirement, but a definite, what would you call it? The mother lode, recruit would be a former gymnast or an acrobat, right? Someone who has
mm-hmm.
that body control that you're talking about. I love it. The ninja thing. Yeah. Every time I see that, I'm just like, I remember the first thing that they showed, the Mount Fuji thing, whatever that was, whatever the big
Yep.
course is that they have in
Yeah,
Japan,
Mount Fujiyama.
that nobody's done except the one guy, right? Is it still that way? Is it still just the one guy from Japan who won it like 5 or 6 times and then nobody else has even finished the course?
So since every course is a little bit different, they had 3 or 4 guys in Japan do it, and then there's been a couple guys in the United States that have done it. So, but it's very rare for the amount of times that it's done. It's actually pretty rare. I mean, they had in Japan the original that ours is sort of based off of. Like out of 35 seasons, they've maybe had 5 times someone's made it all the way through.
Yeah.
One guy did it a couple times, another guy did it a couple times, and
Yeah.
so it's so hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's raised the level of awareness, I think, from at least for the athletes. Like you said, the average person who's unathletic and sees that, it's either like, well, that's not that difficult, or they're like, that's anything is in the realm of I couldn't do that. So they're like, they're
Yeah.
not going to understand the complexities of it, right? But if you've got anybody who has competed as an athlete at a decently high level, they're either going to see that and just be like, oh my God, or they might take it as a personal challenge and say, how can I grow and, overcome all those obstacles? That's an amazing franchise. We've lamented many times on the show, Kyle, that track and field dying, I believe, in this country and in other countries around the world, simply because we don't get TV. I mean, when I break it
Mhm.
all the way down to its simplest core roots of why are we not being successful, and it's unfortunate in some ways because that's just the way the world is now. But it's like, if you're not on TV, you're not making any money. your sport's going to slowly start to die. And then all of a sudden you're on ESPN, the Ocho, late night, 2 in the morning or something.
The Ocho.
If you're fortunate enough to get any airtime at all, right? So it's like, the Olympics come along every 4 years and we get seen on TV, but I'm like, we were talking about it with many different people going, how could we jumpstart, track and field to a place where people are actually household names? I mean, the only names that people remember are Carl Lewis, Usain Bolt. If I mentioned to casual people that are even athletes, said, who Mutaz Barshim is? They'd be like, who's Mutaz Barshim? I'm like, well, he's jumped 7'11" and a half more than anybody ever. Even Sotomayor, the guy jumped 8 feet. He's done it more, and he just won the gold medal in 2021. I guarantee you most people never heard of him, and this is one of the most amazing athletes I've ever seen. So it's like, I lament that fact. And I'm like, how can over here people tell you more about American Ninja than track and field? And not to take anything away from American Ninja, because I love watching it. I'm like, they're doing a great job packaging this. They take those things around to all these cities, right? And they have every year, and it's all funneled towards the same. I remember watching that show that was on for a couple of years. I don't usually watch reality shows, but I used to watch Ultimate Fighter, because to me, I go, this is real. I know they're actually competing for something. And I know, maybe they like to get them in little fights and show them, the guy used the other guy's toothpaste, so now they're going to fight or something. It's like something dumb. But when it comes to them training and getting in the ring and everything, you're like, that's pretty real. And then when you go to the ninja stuff, you're like, they're falling in the water, they're doing whatever, and you're like, that's real. It's easy to buy into. And watching the team thing they did, where they were same thing. It was like, we're going to compete. Everybody's going to learn these skills that are preparing them better for this thing. And the top 4 or 5 guys or whatever are going to go on to this other deal. You're like, oh, we don't have that. Even in track and field, it's like, it's so disjointed. And it's like, I got to find a way to integrate, the best of that stuff.
I know you're almost going to have like a reality competition where somebody goes like to a little town and says, we're going to have a race to find the fastest kid in this town, and then we're going to have little backstories upon everyone, this person, and then we're going to go over here. You're going to have like, who's the fastest in America competition or something like that, who's like not a professional athlete. It's going to have to be something that sort of gets that realm, because I think, unfortunately, to your point, I don't know if it's just because track and field has been just kind of there in the background for a long time. It was more popular long ago than it is now.
Yeah.
Even though the athletes are more, you could say they're more impressive. They're doing things that have never been done before. But I think just over the last couple of decades, especially, unless you do have a Ben Johnson, a Carl Lewis, a Usain Bolt, but even there, like, it's only the Olympic flash, and then pretty much it's gone. Like, I mean, you had, a decathlete who can be one of the best athletes in the world, and the things that they do, unless you happen to see them in a commercial around the Olympics or in the actual Olympic competition in the 12 minutes that they show you, you'd have no idea who any of these people are. And they're some of the most incredible, like, all around movers and athletes in the world. So,
we're hitting.
Anyway, I was going to just kind of mention, so in the Japanese version of the Ninja Warrior, one season, they had, the first obstacle was you had to jump 14 feet over water. So they have not done anything like that in the United States. The Japanese one has always done a little bit more of an eclectic, more full body, more comprehensive physical challenge, as far as, like, you think about like what a ninja might have to do, where they might have to jump from building to building. But it was really cool. That was the only time I've ever seen it, was that the men had to jump 14 feet over water to even just get onto the course. Basically, the women had to jump 10 feet. So if you couldn't jump a certain distance, you couldn't even express any of the rest of the physical grip strength and different things you had. You had to literally jump 10 or 14 feet to get onto the course. And I thought that was just a tremendous way to kind of keep a comprehensive nature to, like, when we think of like a good all-around athlete, if you can't jump 10 feet or 14 feet, like, maybe you don't qualify as a great all-around athlete. And that, because they have some of the things where maybe you have to jump up a little bit, but there's very little of the jumping
Sure.
but that's like a big part of like the ninja,
Yeah.
the ninja culture is to be able to jump and up and scale like that. Anyway, small
Yeah.
little cat
No,
side note there.
yeah, it's funny because, here I'm talking about saving track and field, and now here we are fixing the ninja thing. I would think, I was just like,
Sorry.
what could you add, right? Like having different athletic skills. So running, jumping, maybe the agility. I like the one where they have the tilted pads right at the beginning where they go back and forth. You got to run and balance, jump from leg to leg, side to side. That's a pretty good one. And you've seen some guys, you're watching them as they're standing there. You're like, oh, this should be easy for that guy. And toosh, right into the water. You're like, well, wait a minute. Maybe that's not as easy as it looks, right? But then, so we've got agility, we've got speed. Like there's a speed component, but what if there's a weed out in there also for a basic level of speed? Like you're saying, maybe ninja would have to get from here to here. And if they didn't get it, they're dead. They literally have to get through this quickly or they don't get there. You say, well, now we've got a speed component. So you've got a leaping component, a speed component. Yeah, there's strength in your own body weight, but what if you had to pick something up, right? A certain weight amount somewhere along the way. Or what if you had to shoot a bow and arrow, right? And hit something, right? Or throw something through something. Like these are little things I'm watching going, most of this stuff is just, like you're saying, it's body coordination and obstacles and all that, which I love it. I think it's, again, it seems like every time I watch it, there's some of the events are the same and other times I'm like, oh, that's different. It's similar to what they've done before. There's a little twist to it, but yeah, that would be cool. That I love that. The run and jump thing, even the Matrix where, Neo's standing on the building and you got to free your mind and jumps, a mile away and lands on the other side.
Right.
Whoa, how do I do that? For some people, 14 feet looks like, a mile away. Well, hey, Kyle, I got to get going to my first class. I know you got a busy day. I appreciate your time so much, your insights, your willingness to share with us, going through this injury process and treating it as, a learning experience, I think is a good lesson for everybody. I appreciate, your insights, your willingness to share your experience, all that good stuff. Would love to have you again if you ever find the time and find out some more applications. I have a million questions running through my head about, how to take what you do and move it into the arena of what I do. And then also, and I know you've already done that. I'm the one looking for that application, but again, do you have anything before you go you'd like to share with the listeners about training or how to find you and what you do?
Well, I think in general, one of the things that I try to tell people is to find, like in the general fitness realm, is find whatever works for you. There's 1,000 different ways, like you've mentioned about all the different things you found just on Instagram about how to move and the different things. So find what you connect to and do what works for you, because there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, a lot of different ways to stay fit. But in general, when I look at what I like to impart people on is to move in unique ways and find as many different ways to express your body and your physical nature and your connection to moving that you can, because I think it all just sort of helps develop a good overall physical nature, just like we want to develop smartness and intelligence and all these different things. Let's not forget the body quotient. We talk about intelligent, we talk about emotional. Let's get that athletic or that body quotient developed too, and really kind of help develop the whole person. The younger you could start, the better. But even if you're 85, you're 71, whatever the case is, you can always kind of start moving your body, exploring different things, and just kind of becoming a better overall physical person. So it's all good.
Awesome.
And you can find me on Instagram, Kylek.fit. I'm there most of the time. I share as much as I can. And any questions you guys have, hop on over there and feel free to reach out. But
well,
Troy, thanks so much for having me on. Good talking to you. Like I said, there's a million other things we can get into, particularly get into the weeds of some of the exercise, the transference. So maybe we'll do this again sometime and talk a little bit more basic application.
Hey, well, great. Good luck with that, the rehab. I know you're doing your research, I'm sure, and you're very meticulous and careful, and also, stretching and doing all the things you got to do. And I always think of the knees over toes guy. Now he's reverse dunking and all that. His story was that he only had an 18-inch vertical before he did that, you know, and then rehab made him that much better. And so just want to see you completely back and doing all the stuff that you can do. Because that was the first thing I remember seeing in your post. I'm like, man, this guy's doing some pretty, you know, amazing stuff. And, you know, the slow body control. I want to talk about that sometime, because I was taught by my golf instructor, you can't do it fast before you can do it slow, right? So I show all my positions as walkthroughs first, and then kind of pick up the speed and, you know, that kind of thing. So, all right, sir.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Kyle. We'll talk soon, man.
Same to you.
All
Enjoy.
Right. Good training. All right.
All right. See you, Troy.
See ya. All right. And that was Kyle Knapp at Kylek.fit. He is found in, he's in Newport Beach here in Southern California. He's got 196,000 followers on Instagram. Doesn't follow a lot of people. Kyle Knapp, he is just lists himself as fitness trainer again. And he's got a link tree down there that I'm hitting right here. And I'm going to tell you what it says. Does a lot of stuff. He's got his own, he calls it a Blaze Pod. He's got a code for that. ISO trainer code, Liber Fitness, Flex Disc, Tidal Tank, YouTube. Got a lot of things going on with all those followers. He's a busy guy. You heard him, father of 4, and also rehabbing himself from a major injury there with a complete Achilles tendon rupture. But he's back at it, and he's got some great insights. So thanks again to Kyle. And until next time, I'm going to sign off here. It's been fun talking with you. I'm Troy Haynes of Sky High and Fly Jump Camps. And this has been an early morning, Thursday, August 17th, started at 7, out at 8:05, early morning edition of Raise the Bar. Until next time, remember to keep raising the bar personally and professionally. Keep pushing those boundaries, and we will talk to you here next time with somebody with another insight for us. Until then.